2014 Cadillac XTS rear wheel bearing replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing those. One of the first things we're going to do is rack it up until the rack is just barely touching the rack points, and then we're going to hook the scan tool up to it and deflate the air ride suspension, the suspension control module. And then there's going to be a section where you can on your scan tool you'll push the button and it'll depressurize the system. So you'll go into electronic suspension, and then you'll go to the functions. Oops. If you don't have access to a scan tool to deflate the airbag, what you can do is right here on the back side of the bag, on the top is the line. You can back the threads out a few turns and let it leak out right here. And then once you're done servicing the suspension, you can tighten this line back up snug. You don't want to over tighten it. It's just a little it's a rubber O-ring that seals it up, and also the threads are made out of plastic, so it's really easy to strip these. So you can go ahead and deflate the bag if you want to, and that way you can work on the suspension without worrying about it, any pressure. And then when you're done, all you're gonna do is make sure that line is tight. And you're going to lower the vehicle back down to all four wheels are touching the ground, and you lower it down to where it's about stock ride height. And then you start the vehicle and just let it idle for about 2 or 3 minutes, and the pump will automatically run and re-level itself. So after getting it up on the lift and removing the wheel, I'm going to go ahead and remove the caliper. 18mm bolts that went here and the one below right here. Once you get those two bolts removed, now you can slide the whole caliper and bracket off as one piece like this and set aside. What I'm going to do is actually get a tie strap and hang it from the sway bar. So I just used a couple zip ties like this, wrapped around the caliper, and then hooked it around the sway bar. Next, we're going to remove the set screw here, and I'm going to use an impact screwdriver and the Torx bit, and go ahead and remove the rotor. It's a T30 bit. So I'm going to go ahead and strike the end of this impact screwdriver with a hammer. The little mechanism is going to knock it loose and remove the rotor. Now I'm going to remove the wheel bearing, and there's 3 screws that we're going to remove, and then we're going to remove them from the back side. So we're going to remove the bolt here, here, and here. So you're not going to be able to get a ratchet or a wrench in here to get to this bolt because of the spindle here. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and remove the nut and the bolt that goes all the way through the spindle here. So now with the spindle unbolted and the bottom portion of the strut unbolted, you can swing the arm up and you can get to the bottom bolt on the wheel bearing there. On the front side of the spindle is a 10mm bolt, and you can pull the ABS sensor out before you remove the wheel bearing. Once you get that third bottom bolt out, the whole bearing and backing plate will come off. So now I'm going to put on the new wheel bearing, backing plate, and the bolts. And the bolts, I use the red thread locker. I'll leave a link for that on the description of the video too. You don't want these bolts to back off. If these bolts back off, the wheel falls off. So I use the red on that particular one. And then here's the parts, and I'll also link this up in the description of the video. So I just lined up the backing plate and then lined up the 3 bolt holes in the back and started the bolts to the back. The wheel bearing bolts are torqued down to 66 foot-pounds with the red Loctite on there. I also don't have the bottom bolt in yet. That way I can swing it out of my way to get to the bottom bolt here, to torque it down, and then you can get in here and torque these 2 bolts. So once they're all 3 torqued down to 66 foot-pounds, the long bolt going through here, and I got all the nuts started, and then I also got the bottom of the strut started, and now I'm going to go ahead and install the ABS sensor. So you go ahead and install that and put the 10mm bolt back in. And this also routes underneath this little arm here, like this. When you go to now that all the suspension bolts are back on, we're going to go ahead and run this lower bolt down to 111 foot-pounds. Torque that down. The bolt here will be at 111 foot-pounds. Now you can go ahead and install your rotor and the set screw. Now that your rotors are your rotor is back on, now you can take your caliper bracket and caliper and slide it back over the rotor. Pads, whatever, move or shift or whatever, you may have to adjust them here with your fingers. Now you're going to reinstall the 2 caliper bolts in the back here. and then torque these down to 66 foot-pounds. What you're going to do is, if you loosen the brake line or the airbag hose here, you're going to make sure that's snug back up. If not, if you bled it out with the scan tool like I did, what you're going to do is lower the vehicle back down to where it's like stock height with the rack, and then you're going to start the car and let it run for a couple of minutes, and that'll air, and the pump will run by itself and air up the suspension. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this, and also to remind you that I will link up all the parts and tools that are used in this video. Thank you again for watching.